Hello and welcome to our webinar, Navigating the New Normal, Driving Business Growth with Cross-Border E-Commerce. I wanted to start with a few housekeeping items. First, if you'd like to ask questions during the webinar, you can type them into the chat box on the right side of the screen. We'll leave a little time at the end so that we can answer some of your questions. If we run out of time and can't get to your question, we will reach out to you directly to answer it. So don't worry. Now, when we first put together the slides in the second half of the presentation, which is the case study conversation between Rob from Flow and Katelyn from Rowing Blazers, we had to shorten it a little bit due to the timing of the presentation so that we could keep it to 1 hour. We do have the full original deck available with some additional slides with more data. So if you would like that longer version of the presentation, please reach out to us at sales@flow.io and we'll gladly send it over. So thank you so much for joining. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Our first speaker today is Varon, Senior Analyst at Forrester, who will give her perspective on today's global e-commerce landscape. So Lily, I'll hand the slides over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. So, as you guys may know, Forrester tracks and collects and collates a bunch of data on retail and e-commerce across the globe. And when the pandemic hit, one of the number one questions that our customers were asking us was, what is the impact on e-commerce? What is the impact on retail? What can we expect? And so at the beginning of the pandemic, we put together a scenario planner where we essentially put all of this data together, put what we knew about sales so far, and created a kind of best case scenario, worst case scenario, and base case for the duration of the pandemic, the impact on consumer spend, et cetera, on global e-commerce and on global retail. And in mid-April, things were looking pretty bleak. And there's still some data out there that is really bleak, where 92% of economies are in a recession. Some GDP shrinkage is happening, like in 15% declines in GDP and things like this. And so at the time we built this kind of this scenario that you see in front of you here. Offline retail having quite a bit of an impact and shrinking about 11.5%, and online growing a bit at 0.6%, with the overall impact being sort of a shrinkage of retail overall at 10%. But it turns out, and so we've been updating this in an ongoing way, that retail has been a bit more resilient. Retail spend, consumer spending, e-commerce, retail has been more resilient than we thought, and consumers have been spending more online as a result of the pandemic, and actually buoying some of the e-commerce market. So you can see here that consumers across the globe have bought more online as a result of the pandemic. It's 41% of consumers in the US, it's 66% of consumers in China, and thereabouts across the 6 countries that we have tracked here. What that means, and we haven't published this data yet, so I'm giving you kind of a preview here directionally, is that our new scenario planner actually shows retail's resiliency. So offline retail is still shrinking overall, but online is really the star here, right? The average online retail sales growth has really kept retail from sinking into the depths of what we anticipated, even a few months ago. In the US, when you look at some of the big, scary retail numbers, it's because they're including sectors that have been disproportionately hit, like automotive, like restaurants, like gas and petrol, when in the US, for example, in May, if you exclude those three categories, retail still actually grew. And in some sectors, actually e-commerce is the share of online sales is growing so tremendously. So, you look at some even definitely grocers, but even in apparel and electronics, the share of online as a percent of the total retail sales, these sectors are seeing sort of 2 to 4 times the amount of retail sales than they were seeing pre this pandemic. So, um, the online and e-commerce is certainly still the star of the show. Um, some categories though aren't ready for this. So, grocery is a perfect example of this, but others, even in apparel and other categories, if they haven't put the emphasis on online and um, e-commerce before, they're not ready for the shipping, logistics, the cost, and the overhead of an e-commerce business. But folks who who are mature online, who have done this work, are well set up. They sort of already know how these budgets work. So that's sort of where we are. Offline retail definitely, logically hardest hit. Online retail buoying and keeping sort of retail somewhat afloat, and in some cases to an extreme degree. And even in these sort of unprecedented times, there's some precedent for this. We saw e-commerce grow through the U.S. In the U.S. through the Great Recession, right, in the 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe. We saw e-commerce and see e-commerce growing through Argentina's ongoing recession, right? They're in the midst of this now, and have been for a few years. We've seen this even in Brazil in their very intense crisis around the 2015 timeframe. E-commerce has grown through each of these. And more recently in the UK as well, despite the sort of uncertainty and scenario around Brexit in the 2016-2017 timeframe. So e-commerce has grown. E-commerce has grown across the globe through times of economic uncertainty, and in this recession, we see the same thing happening. In fact, to an even more extreme degree. But as I sort of mentioned before, the retail environment, the impact of the pandemic hasn't really hit the retail environment evenly. You certainly have certain sectors and certain retailers, even within those sectors, experiencing this pandemic differently. So, retailers sort of, Forrester sort of broadly categorizes retailers sort of, and all firms, and the pandemic's impact on them in these three buckets. Some retailers are in survival mode. They've experienced really significant revenue contractions. Their revenue has dropped 40 to 95%, depending, and they're really struggling to recoup sales, save money, and essentially survive through this. There are some firms that are in adaptive mode, where portions of the business have been severely disrupted. Other parts might see only minor disruption or even grow through the recession. So you might see something like 10 to 30% drops in revenue in this group overall. And then you've got those in growth mode, where the pandemic has just shown the light. The sunlight is bright for these folks. They're experiencing new revenue opportunities and revenue growth because their products are in demand, their services are in demand, and they're well positioned with their investments in digital and whatnot to grow, right? And they're actually experiencing overall revenue growth. And the story here, I think, is that consumer behavior has shifted across the globe. Consumers have absolutely changed, how they spend, who they spend with, the tools that they use. Even really stubborn, sticky things like payment methods, right? In the U.S., consumer payments and changing consumer payments behavior has been one of the hardest things to shift over, in the history of e-commerce in this country. And you've actually seen quite a bump, quite a change in consumer payments usage, right? I think it was something like 19% of consumers had used contactless payments for the first time in a store as a result of the pandemic. So I like to use that as a kind of microcosm. Payments has been something that's been really tough to get consumers to change their behavior on, and the pandemic has been an impetus for that. So, and some of these, what this data shows here is consumers, you know, how likely the likelihood that they are going to continue to do some of these new shopping behaviors when this stay-at-home restrictions are lifted. And consumers are showing a willingness, that they're anticipating a likelihood of continuing to do these behaviors once the stay-at-home orders have kind of lifted. So we have to be able to respond to those behaviors, right? I think one of the things that has really come to the surface as a result of this pandemic is it solidified for many of us the importance of adapting. And all of this talk for years and years of digital transformation has really led us to this point, right? I think, and this might be a controversial statement, but I think that that enterprise adaptability is actually what digital transformation results in, right? That's the promise of digital transformation. And what is an adaptive enterprise? It is one that has the capacity to reconfigure its underlying business concept by dramatically rethinking its core mission, its value proposition, its core competencies, the markets or industries in which it competes, and its end customer. When disruption isn't new, but this level of disruption is absolutely new. And I think that what it has really brought home is the importance of our ability to adapt to changing spending habits, to changing the changing competitive landscape, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a really wonderful segue to handing it over to Rob and to Katelyn to talk through, cross-border. Cross-border is the online retail is the way to serve new customers in new geographies, and I think is an example of an adaptation. So I'm very pleased to hand this over to them to keep this conversation going.
Lily, really appreciated your insight there. It's good to see how global e-commerce really continues to grow, not only during past market disruptions, but also now during the current economic climate. So, okay, we'll move on to our next speakers, which include Rob Keve, the CEO and co-founder of Flow, and Katelyn Glass, the head of e-commerce and marketing at Rowing Blazers, an American lifestyle fashion brand. And they'll discuss Rowing Blazers' approach to cross-border, as well as their perspectives on cross-border e-commerce and how Flow enables brands to market, sell, and ship products to shoppers worldwide by providing those shoppers with easy local shopping experiences. So thank you very much for staying on the line, and I'll hand it over to Rob now.
Great. Thank you very much, Juliana. Welcome, everyone, to our latest webinar. Thank you very much, Lily, for sharing Forrester's perspective. Fascinating to hear how buoyant retail really is and how it's starting to get traction in a post-COVID world. I'm delighted to be welcoming Katelyn Glass of Rowing Blazers to talk about some of her experiences, both at Rowing Blazers and in prior roles. We've known Katelyn for some time and know her to be a very thoughtful, innovative leader in e-commerce. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Katelyn, to today's webinar. So what I would love to do is share a little bit about Flow for context, and then without further ado, dive into two streams. One is Flow's perspective of what the opportunity and challenges are in selling cross-border, both during the COVID era and beyond, and interweave that with Katelyn's perspective of what she's seeing firsthand from her experience as a leader in e-commerce and as a principal in this process. So by way of introduction to Flow, we are, as many of you will know, a pioneer and leader in cross-border e-commerce. We're a software platform that brands use to sell globally. So for any brand who's ambitious and wants to capture sales from their international traffic, or for any business that's already selling internationally but wants to do it with a higher conversion rate and truly localized customer experience, Flow is their answer. Flow is a turnkey solution that has 5 components. These 5 you see on screen. Product localization, meaning making sure that prices display duties and taxes, that prices are in local currency, that they're cleanly rounded, and that merchants have all kinds of flexibility to add margin, target local pricing using price books or exchange rates, and all of those tools are at their fingertips. And this sits on top of the merchant's own e-com platform, whether that's a proprietary home-built one or a standard one like a Magento, a Demandware, or any of the others. The second thing that Flow does to make sure that all your international needs are addressed is calculate duty and taxes for all products and manages the remittance and classification, the HS codes and product restrictions, material restrictions. The third thing is making sure that international shipping is taken care of by way of integrating into many different shippers, express shippers, standard rate shippers, expedited shippers, and the best shippers in each region, not one size fits all. And more than that, we offer the rates that we get with our volumes to our clients so they can leverage those. And everything that goes with that, labels, delivery windows, tracking, returns, and the like. Fourthly, Flow manages checkout to make sure that brands can pay with many different payment methods, whatever is prevalent in that country, to make sure that they can be charged in local currency so they don't have customer service problems when they're charged in dollars, to make sure that things like refunds are working well, to ensure that merchants don't have any chargebacks or exposed to risk, and to make sure that fees, particularly things like cross-border fees, are dealt with as best as possible through some back-end processes that we manage. And then we tie this all together with a very interesting layer, which we'll come on to talk about later, which is around the ability to optimize different settings by country. What's the perfect price point or perfect rounding number or perfect display in each country? Similarly on shipping, similarly on checkout. So our client success team lean in or invite clients to do it themselves directly on the easy-to-use console to test different settings to see which performs best in which countries. As international is not a one-size-fits-all, but rather a mix of 200 different markets, and the top 10 or 20 will account for a lot of revenue, so getting the right setting is very important. With that, I would love to introduce Katelyn and invite Katelyn to introduce those who haven't already purchased from Rowing Blazers. I'd strongly encourage you to do so, to introduce us to the brand and perhaps a bit about her role and vision for the brand. Katelyn. Katelyn, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you. Yes, perfect. Wonderful.
So I'll start from the beginning, but to give you guys an overview of Rowing Blazers, we were founded back in 2017 by Dr. Jack Carlson. He was a 3-time member of the U.S. national rowing team. He's an author, an archaeologist, and he literally wrote the book Rowing Blazers while he was a student at Oxford. Today, we're a lifestyle brand. We believe in the classics. We are anything but stuffy. We're youthful, inclusive, irreverent, a little ironic. We are based out of our clubhouse here in Soho, NYC. Yeah, go to the next.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Katelyn.
Yeah, of course.
Hopefully people are looking on the site as we speak.
Yes. So, you know, we as a global brand had a varying amount of reasons why we needed to go global and why we wanted to do so really quickly. We're a global brand. We've got an eclectic mix of customers, be it British, be it Japanese. We are ingrained in sort of that European old school style, that New York old school style. We've got a very, very broad fan base. You can get everything from a classic blazer to a graphic tee. We launch weekly collections and we have monthly collaborations. We've worked with many, many international partners, institutions, and brands. And then as we continued and thought about how we would embark on our sort of global journey, I have worked with Flow personally for over 3 years and have had a very successful record in working with Flow. So that obviously helped guide some of my decision making.
Wonderful. And so, Katelyn, is the implication that because the theme and the differentiation of wearing blazers was such a universal trend that you wanted to reach a global audience?
Yeah, it's interesting, Rob. I think at a basic level, it's 2020. Sites need to be shipping global. There is a whole world out there that can easily get access to your brands. Couple that with the fact that we have significant traffic from international countries, but because we weren't doing things like localization and really any sort of optimization for our international customer, we weren't really able to capitalize on them in this great way. So we were getting all the clicks and we were doing everything right, but we just weren't able to optimize for them.
Fantastic. That's great. And I like what you were saying prior to the call about it's 2020. Why wouldn't we be global? It's easy to do. We just have to make sure that the customer experience is strong. And otherwise it's, it's the year where if you're not global, you should be asking yourself, why not? I think that's got to be right. And in fact, this data on the right shows how prevalent purchasing cross-border is with consumers around the world. The x-axis shows the percentage of consumers who have purchased recently cross-border. And you can see Australia, Canada, France, Germany, UK, China, all have more than 2/3 of their population comfortably, regularly purchasing cross-border. So it's a phenomena that's here now. It's not something forward-looking or aspirational. And reasons why, if we look across our large client base, why they have chosen to go global, it's varied. But I think mostly they reflect Katelyn's view that it's low-hanging revenue. Why wouldn't you? Expanding your physical footprint is more deliberate, more expensive, is a whole strategic question. But going global in an online world should be a no-brainer. Top 5 reasons. 1, global nature of search. Consumers find your site, whether they intended to or not, whether they were searching for something similar or just the right demographic. Between mobile commerce and global nature of search, they find you. And so it's site traffic hitting your site. Similarly, on social media, references, referrals, celebrities mentioning it drive traffic to your site. It's often cheaper in many geographies to acquire customers. In some countries, were you to dig into your analytics. And some brands now have, as Katelyn was saying earlier on, wearing blazers, have international reach already, whether that's through distribution or franchises or channels or licensing. And so the consumer awareness is there. And why not capitalize on your own consumer awareness globally? This chart I find fascinating because it shows 2 things. One is, on average, how much site traffic is coming from international? If you were to look at the top 1,000 brands here in the US, and I should have done this blind and done it as a survey, what people would expect. I think people's expectation is still that we're in 2015, and that number is 5% or something like that. The average is 44%. 44% of the site traffic coming from outside of your domestic market. And obviously it's an average, so some will be more, some less, but that's a crazy high average. And even higher when you think about, and we'll come on to talk about, how little of that is converting, and therefore how big an opportunity it is. And the second insight, I think, on this slide is, if you think about how crazy 2020 has been and what has COVID meant for international e-commerce, it's not only grown, but it's outstripped domestic e-commerce. It's grown by 17 relative to 14% as compared to this time last year. So it's not only large, but outgrowing almost any other segment you could imagine. So if you aren't already thinking about how you can improve your international experience or go international for the first time, the time was yesterday. You really should be thinking about it. And just very quickly, a point on countries. This shows how countries have been performing during the COVID period. And the point being that many countries are at different phases in their recovery. And so the more you're diversified across many countries, the more you'll benefit from the speed with which they're coming back in different markets. With that question having been answered, why go global? I think there's plenty of compelling evidence and reasons. The next question would be when? At what stage in your development do you think about going global? And so we'd love to get Rowing Blazers' perspective on this.
Yeah, so overall, we had been shipping global in a very, very small way. It was really expensive for us. It was taking way too much time. And we were realizing as our business was growing, we needed to do something about it. We retail our brand in Beams Plus, a wholesale account out in Japan. And we have this APAC consumer that wasn't able to readily get our product at a costly and a efficient way. And we knew that in time, yesterday, I want to grow that market. And I have all these customers out there. I just gotta make it easier for them to get our brand. Given who we are ingrained in the rowing community. Jack receiving his doctorate from Oxford. We're big in Europe. Customers know us and love us. We get a lot of traffic from countries like the Netherlands and countries like France and Germany. And we wanted, once again, to be able to reach them in a very efficient way. I recently joined Rowing Blazers. Well, at this point, it's been about 9 months. And as we were optimizing our paid digital strategies across the board, we were recognizing what an opportunity we had in certain countries like the United Kingdom, like Canada, like Australia, where even without translations, we were able to market to them, be it on social or in Google. I think the biggest thing for us is that, as Lily noted upon earlier, despite COVID, we are in that growth phase as a company. My leadership team and our team as a whole has done a fantastic job in ensuring our success and ensuring our future. We were able to pivot very early on in the pandemic to start producing and shipping face masks with sort of they were our leftover blazer scraps. And we were able to do so in a very sustainable way. And we have been able to see a really, really strong growth. And like you mentioned too, Rob, we're actually seeing that growth outpace in international than we are in domestic. And that was sort of, hey, we got to do this and we got to do it now.
Brilliant. I love that. And I love how Rowing Blazers is a scrappy but really well-defined proposition and gets these rich seams in Japan and Holland and other countries that I think if you're sitting behind your desk, you wouldn't have thought. Unless you put it out there, you don't know where you're going to get these pockets of huge fandom.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And more broadly, answering the same question across our client base, when we ask what were the signs that you knew you're ready to go global, one was this very point, getting a lot of international site traffic. Have a look at it. If you don't know what it is today, look up your site traffic, compare domestic to international. If it's in the double digits, you should be capitalizing on that, because I'm willing to bet that if you look at the conversion rate of international traffic and compare that to the conversion rate of domestic, it's a poor diluted version of it. And that's the opportunity to convert that at a much higher rate and then build on that base to grow it. Two, there's international demand for your goods. As rowing blazers couldn't be a more perfect, more emblematic example of that. There's nothing uniquely American about rowing and rugby. The demand for that look and style is global. And having been a rugby player in Holland, they are identical to the ones in England, to the ones in Australia, to the ones here, and have the same fashion requirements. Wanting to diversify your market presence. Why be solely dependent on one market? As we've seen with both with recessions and COVID, when that market tanks, you're completely exposed to it. If you're diversified across many markets, you smooth your revenue and balance that risk. Four, capitalizing on consumer awareness from other channels. If you're already selling through wholesale, through partnerships to other markets, you're developing a consumer base that is brand aware. They will want to come to your site and purchase directly. So important that you can service them direct to consumer. And pre and competition, we've seen in many cases, brands think about, is it the right time, and realize that Me Too copycats are springing up all over, and they want to steal a march and stop them gaining traction. And so they go global early. Let me answer a couple of questions that have been coming in before we keep going, so we don't pile them up at the end. One question relates directly to shipping. And the question is, what are the transit times expectations for consumers in Canada and Europe when purchasing from US brands? From the flow experience across our brands, our client success team lean into these questions a lot. What are consumers' expectations? How should you price it? And what's the most efficient way of shipping it? At Flow, we ship direct from brands to consumers. There is no hopping into a cross dock and losing a few days. So we print labels directly in our clients' DCs, both with express carriers and other carriers, enable it to be shipped internationally. So let me answer first what we do. We enable express shipping both to Europe and Canada in one day. So literally a day after the order, the parcel could be received by the consumer in Europe and Canada. And expectations to some degree are set by what you promise on the site. Our clients who wanted to take advantage of that have made it clear at checkout that this is a 1 day, 2 day shipping window, maximum 3. And so that helps drive traffic. Consumers are now thinking of this as a domestic transaction, something that I can get instant gratification from within 24 hours, 48 hours, and not I'm placing an order cross-border, who knows when it will arrive, I won't have any expectations, and 5 weeks later it turns up. In fact, my son just ordered a puzzle from China 3 months ago. No idea where it is, no idea if it's left the factory, no shipping, no tracking. Clearly they don't use Flow. As to what the expectation is, that's the demarcation. Do they think of this as a great cross-border experience and akin to domestic, and therefore will convert as readily as domestic? Or do they think of this as a risky, tricky cross-border experience? What we also do at Flow is try to draw a distinction between fast and cheap. So the express shipping can be there 1 to 2 days, Europe, Canada, and many other parts around the world, and 1 to 3 anywhere in the world. But we also encourage our customers to leverage the Flow integrations into standard rate shipping, which is a fraction of the cost. It will take a few days longer, but surfacing that trade-off to consumers so they can choose between very fast or cheap, and maybe the brand offers that for free at a certain basket size, is a nice trade-off for consumers to think about. Do I want it free or do I want it quickly? The standard rate ones to Europe, I think the range at the moment is 3 to 8 days. So not long at all for cheap. And Canada, last I saw, was 3 to 4 days. So again, tight. The important thing is not to be inefficient in leaving US and getting it international. With that, let me get back to our presentation and move on to the next part, which is about friction and challenges. And Katelyn, maybe you could speak to firsthand what you've experienced as the points of friction in trying to sell cross-border. It looks easy to just integrate into a shipper and you're done.
Sure.
But I know you've had experience of, if you're trying to do it well and convert well, it's not that easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now we use, or we have been using, a carrier to take our packages across country or to multiple countries. And the same things you just mentioned, Rob, it was taking way too long. It was taking my team way too long. And not to mention, it was incredibly expensive. One thing that COVID had done and this pandemic brought about for us was this crazy optimization in our supply chain. We were noticing areas of our supply chain that were broken that prior to the pandemic and sort of the steadier growth we had been seeing weren't that big of a deal. But we went from shipping 5 packages internationally a week to 20 to 30 a day. And it's really hard when you have a small team, when you have limited bandwidth, to do all of these customs documentation and the time you have to spend talking to the customer about where products are and what's taking so long and all of these things. We did not have any ability to streamline any of that outbound supply chain. A big challenge of cross-border, and prior to me finding Flow and working with you guys the first time around, I thought as an e-com expert working in this industry, I was not able to optimize a lot of the things that as a brand I wanted to be able to control. I've worked in my previous worlds for various brands where pricing, as I'm sure it is for many of you, pricing is the utmost thing you want to be able to control. And sometimes a direct conversion of FX it isn't going to cut it for you. What we were able to do and what we're still able to do with Flow is the flexibility to offer our product at a price that is right for us in a specific market, customize that, as well as A/B test certain shipping thresholds, test what the display pricing is, test the calculated duties and taxes and whether it makes sense to include them or pay for them on our own, or however you want to line item that out to your customer. And I think all of these things where just a simple carrier solution can't really help you optimize, Flow serves as a huge advantage there. The other one is just the localized payment methods. I think, as Americans, we sometimes get very selfish and stuck in thinking our way is the way of the world. The reality of it is the majority of the world doesn't utilize credit the way we do. I need, as an e-commerce expert, to be able to accept wire transfers from South Korea. And with Flow, we're able to have 26 different, and I think it might be more, Rob. I don't know if that's the most up to date, but we have 26 different payment methods from South Korea that customers are able to use. They want to be able to use their SEPA card in Germany and their Octopus card in Hong Kong and Naver Pay or Alipay or whatever it is. And rather than me as a limited team and a small brand going out to all of these different places and having all of these partnerships and relationships that I have to manage, Flow makes it really easy for me to localize payment methods so that I can transact in local currencies without overcomplicating it, really. And lastly, I think someone asked a question about return expectations. Returns are really costly for anyone in retail in general. And right now, it was really hard for us to process returns. I know Flow had rolled out ways to process returns in console I think it was last year. I'm getting my months mixed up.
Yep.
And that was a huge value add for us. And that comes at no additional cost to me as the client of Flow to be able to seamlessly process returns in localized currencies and payment methods and all of that within their console rather than having to do it in Shopify or wherever your e-com platform is.
Fantastic. That's great, Katelyn. Thank you. That gives us a flavor for all of the different challenges that we face as merchants when thinking about international. And as you very kindly say, Flow does address all of them. Here are some of them listed out on a survey that we've done previously, and this is just a subset of the issues that come up: shipping being expensive, shipping being slow, taxes and duties not being clear or not being prepaid is a big issue. Otherwise, consumers have to pay duties and tax as an unknown amount on the doorstep. So UPS is on the doorstep, or FedEx saying, we need to collect duties and taxes, even though you may not have been aware of it on the site. So essential that you can display those on your site at the point of purchase. Exchange rates, language at checkout, many payment methods being offered and not just cards, being able to be charged in local currency are just a few of the pain points. So let's move on with that into the solution to these pain points. We've alluded to a few of them, but if we dig a bit deeper into how you get these things working and what are some of the more important ones of the many pain points that Katelyn was discussing that you address if you want to have a clean customer experience, a great one that's as strong as your domestic, and one, importantly, that converts at a high rate. Over to you, Katelyn.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of sum it up. I know the time is getting a little late. One of the things, as I encourage everyone in the e-commerce space, is to be patient because the right tool for you is out there. I think 3-4 years ago, when I did my first round of collecting RFPs and scopes from certain various globalization tools, I was truly concerned because we wanted to do it in a way that would not open the floodgates for our brand and make sure it was very, very controlled, like I previously mentioned. It was a matter of selecting the right tech partner who could help us address every hurdle that we would have, from shipping and logistics to payment methods, localization, be it translations even, duties and taxes. The flexibility to control margins and pricing with rounding rules is a big one for any brand who doesn't want to show those, not necessarily dollars, but Canadian dollars and cents in there, or however your pricing model is set up. And secondly, for a lot of us, and for a lot of us in e-commerce, especially 4 years ago too, this was really new. And to just say, okay, there's one way of doing it and this is how it's going to be, the ability that Flow was able to provide me as an e-commerce expert and marketer was the A/B testing. I could test what my pricing should be in a market. Do I have some room to raise my prices in Japan, but don't necessarily want to affect pricing in the UK? All of those areas, I think, were really what enabled me to really grow with this platform and grow with this tool and really drive business.
Perfect. Thank you. I always think of it as death by 1,000 cuts. There are so many things that you need to think about to get international working, and you need a lot of them in place for the customer experience to be strong. Otherwise, there are gaps in it and it feels risky or expensive to consumers and puts them off purchasing. So the 5 categories we talked about earlier, I'm not going to deep dive into them, but all 5 of these are areas that you need to think about when making sure that your brand is international enabled. Any one of them will cause big gaps and drops in conversion, whether that's local pricing being nicely rounded, duty and taxes displayed, being able to target your catalog, meaning which parts of your catalog to offer to which countries, ensuring local payment methods, otherwise consumers can get to checkout and not be able or willing to pay, and cheap and fast international shipping, and then finding the right setting by country. Let me loop in here one of the questions around return partners and return expectations as well. As Katelyn was saying, from her perspective, brands often think about returns for international differently from domestic. Where domestic, you may offer free and large windows for returns. That does become expensive or more expensive for international because it's hard to get economies of scale on the return leg. And we offer and see the full gambit. Some brands say, only going to offer very limited returns. Some use Flow to enable full returns across the board. And as a platform, we give recommendations by country, but the platform enables either or any of those approaches. Flow is a tech platform. It is API first. We have, I think, 1,000 plus API endpoints, and it's pre-integrated into many ecom platforms. So if you're on a standard ecom platform, we already have the app, the cartridge, the plugin for it, most likely. And if you're on a proprietary platform, you could very simply use our documentation and our platform engineering team to add it. We've had integrations be as quick as 1 or 2 weeks, sometimes longer, but this is not a project that needs drag out and become a big workflow. And we have continuous development. I always like to talk about that, meaning our dev teams are continuously releasing updates to our platform, continuously putting out new features. We have an email that goes out every single Wednesday with new features that have been developed in the prior 7 days. So innovation is at the heart of our philosophy at Flow. All of this would be pointless if it wasn't driving real economic results. So our penultimate section is about exactly that. At Flow, we've seen all kinds of different results. They vary a lot because brands have different objectives. Some, the objective is just to grow top line. And in many cases, they've used Flow tools to drive traffic up by 4x, as you see here. There's a feature in the beta, which we haven't talked about here, and we're not going to dive into today, but it's a feature that allows clients to internationalize their traffic demand generation plans. It's a fascinating new feature that a Flow team has developed. I believe it's just come out of beta, and so we have many clients now using it in anger, and it allows them to ensure that their Google, their Facebook, and other platform advertising is highly localized, and so they could drive traffic to the site. For other clients, the most important metric is sales conversion. And there we've had all kinds of successes, from 72% here to case studies we've published around 100% and 200% lift in conversion rate. Sometimes that's immediately as they cut over to a great localized customer experience. Sometimes that is in steps, incremental steps, as we run A/B tests, test different settings, different configurations for each country, find winners, and use that winner to drive the next experience. And so each one may drive some experience, and over time, we keep peeling away the onion layers and improving the sales conversion rate. And as Flow has great shipping rates, I think Katelyn alluded to, the rates that brands get when they're on their own often aren't nearly as strong as the ones that someone with aggregated scale can provide. We pass those on willingly to our customers. Looking ahead, and please feel free to add questions as we answer these slides around looking ahead in the chat box. If you have any questions, please type them in there. So Katelyn, as you look ahead for Rowing Blazers, what does the near future look like?
Yeah, on a brand basis, we have some exciting products coming out. We're continuing our face mask program. We also are launching our first women's collection this fall, which is, I personally am really excited for, but I know we all are as a team. We've got some really, really exciting collaborations coming out this fall. So shameless plug, I encourage you all to check out rowingblazers.com, signing up for our email. And that's really leading our growth for holiday and 2021. I think as we look to Flow, really what's next is that optimization piece. We are, Flow for me has been in the past a one-click tool to help me get on AdWords, to help me get on paid social in all of these localized regions in a way to optimize conversion. And that's really what's next for us. I think when you think about what advice to give like-minded individuals in the e-commerce space, I think we all have tendencies to look at the very low-hanging fruit. If you are in e-commerce and haven't heard about mainland China, send me an email. I have plenty of links and paper for you to read. But we're sort of beyond that at this point even. I think I'm looking at emerging markets in the e-commerce space, whether it be Brazil, and I never would have thought before Flow that I was interested in Brazilian tax law. I'm looking at everything from Brazil to what's next in India and what that looks like in the next 5 to 10 years. And really, I think you tend to think about emerging markets in a finance lens. But I remember in my prior worlds, the first day I got to log into Shopify and see a transaction from Azerbaijan. Someone had purchased a pair of sunglasses from a brand that I previously worked for. That was just exciting in terms of what this means for the world. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where Rowing Blazers can be, whether it be Azerbaijan or Australia. So yeah, we've got a big few years ahead of us, and we are very, very excited for sort of the trajectory that Flow has allowed for us.
Wonderful. I love that most people can't pronounce the word Azerbaijan, and the local tax laws in the most remote countries in the world. That's what makes you a sales leader, and that's hopefully why they're paying you the big bucks to drive brands globally. And at the end, we have contact details, including Katelyn. So I know she offered a few things there, and perhaps she'll even offer to answer questions if you have. We think of her as one of the pioneers and thought leaders of global e-commerce, and there is a lot of nuance behind it, and she has the scars from having done it for many years. So if she offers, I think it's a great opportunity to take her up on.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Let me hit on some of these takeaways that we have found with and summarize some of the deck, and then let me turn back to a few more questions that have come in since then. So if you do nothing else and took nothing else from the flow part of the presentation, we'd recommend 5 action points. 1, go and look at what your site traffic is for international, and look at your sales conversion rate of international, compare that to domestic, and look at the delta. If it's significant, and I'm willing to bet it is, you need to improve your international experience. It's very low-hanging fruit. You don't need to invest any more in acquisition marketing. That's traffic that's already on your site. It's just not willing to purchase because it looks risky, it's expensive, time-consuming, and it doesn't feel domestic-like. At Flow, we address that, but the first point is to see what the business case is for you, even if you didn't do any international marketing. 2, act on it. Find a cross-border solution. Flow is the pioneering leader in it, so we would welcome you to reach out and ask any questions you have for us. 3, look at how big that opportunity is for your segment, whether that's a niche segment or a broad segment. We can often help you size that opportunity. Think about what kind of international experience you want. And there's a good question that's come up that I'm going to refer back to on that. Do you want to be global in every country and capitalize on any traffic that hits your site across, I think, 182 countries that we ship to? Or do you want to be heavily focused on a dozen or so countries? Do you want to have a very localized experience in the top markets and test heavily there? Or do you want to test across the whole gambit? And solve it. So I think what you look for in a solution is simple and easy, but flexible and inexpensive. It says EG Flow, I think it should probably be IE Flow, but either which way, we'd love to have a conversation. One of the questions that just came in was, can we talk a bit about differences between markets? I guess that could be interpreted either as, where have we been surprised there's a surprising amount of traffic and interest, or indeed, have we seen differences in expectations or needs that consumers have in different markets? Any thoughts, Katelyn?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I've addressed it. I sort of look at it overall as a region. So expectations in terms of shipping and taxes in LATAM is very different than in the European Union, for example. And what does that mean? I know my sister just came back from living in Ecuador for 2 years, and it was tough for her to even receive a package. And for us to be able to deliver to Ecuador, where they have very low expectations on delivery, versus Brazil, where they're so worried about taxes and how by including taxes and maybe adding a margin to your pricing, you can really satisfy a lot more customers. And then, you know, in the UK, and no offense, Rob, in the UK and in European countries, people want it and they want it the next day, and they don't expect custom holds, and they expect that you just are able to get it to them. And we needed to figure out how to do that. Yeah, I tend to look at it very LATAM, EU, APAC specific. Expectations, you know, in APAC, sometimes it can be as simple as wanting to see a site in simple or traditional Chinese. So it really all depends what country you look at it in and what is important to you. I know, sorry, one more point there is in prior worlds, it's been about your brand strategy as well. I come from a brand that had a very robust distribution strategy. So I had about 43 experiences, I think, on Flow with different price books because I had set pricing in all of these regions. One of the challenges I'm excited for here at Rowing Blazers is the A/B testing of my pricing, given that I have a very limited distribution globally. So it really all depends based on what your goals are as a brand and where you want to sort of make your focus.
Fantastic. Thank you. And you're quite right about Brits, me in particular, demanding and precocious and obnoxious. And that's me on a good day. I was going to add that, as I said before, I think what's interesting is there are very different expectations in countries, between countries, around things like shipping expectations. And that means that when you are going to run a promotion, or even how you're thinking about what your offering would be to be margin neutral, getting it right by country and understanding their expectations is important. If Australian consumers are far more sensitive to duties and far less sensitive to shipping, because shipping is rarely free if you're in a vast country, then that's where you should be making sure that you're offering your subsidies on duties and protecting your margin on the product, and not discounting on shipping. And the reverse may be true in Canada, where they may be much more free shipping sensitive, and so you want to protect your margin elsewhere and make sure you can offer free shipping. And I think the second point, as Katelyn alluded to, is oftentimes when you're in market selling to 200 countries, you'll find seams that you didn't expect. In Holland, Japan, Israel, Brazil, Nigeria, you'd expect the top 10 to look largely similar, but finding these rich seams that you wouldn't have expected, where they punch above the weight and you've got a surprisingly rich seam of customers, is always compelling. So with that, I thank you for your time. Hopefully you got a good, rich insight from this. There's plenty of information to be had if you want to follow up with us. Before I hand back to Juliana to wrap us up, I'd like to personally thank Katelyn for leaning in and being so open about her experience at Rowing Blazers and expertise in cross-border. And a big thank you to Lily for representing Forrester and their fantastic research.
Thank you, Rob. Anytime.
Well, great. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you as well, Rob. Really appreciated all of you making the time for this. And that was lots of great information. So I hope our audience has really gotten a sense of the importance of cross-border and also how to manage it and get up and running quickly to take advantage of the current global e-commerce growth that Lily talked about and that Katelyn and Rob were also talking about. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and have a great day.